Okay, this one is a shout out to Lex Lutheran on Twitter. A buddy of mine was discouraged that Lutherans in particular don't seem to care for evangelism, so I wanted to tell him a story from my childhood growing up in the Cleveland area. So I grew up in the ELCA, and my mom was the chairperson of the multicultural committee for that half of the state of Ohio. And one of the things that her committee had done one summer when I was in my teens was they had a Southern African bishop, ELCA Lutheran bishop, come up and talk to them about evangelism, to this committee of liberal intellectual Christians, in the flats, by the flats in Cleveland. And if you're from the city back in the 90s, the flats was not where you wanted to be. And everything was going well. And downtown Cleveland is one of those places where you go left and you're fine, and you go a block right and you're taking your life in your hands, kind of a place. Anyway, so given that nature of Cleveland, everybody grew really concerned when the lunch break happened and the bishop and his wife stepped out. And this is, black guy from Southern Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, really nice dude. My mom got along really well with him, but so he disappears during lunch break, and everybody starts to get a little nervous. And now, half an hour later, he's still not there, and he had never told anybody where he was going to be. And okay, maybe he just went for lunch, and 45 minutes goes by, and now people are getting a little antsy because here's somebody from another country, close to some rough neighborhoods, and he's from kind of a rural area and a smaller city, and Cleveland isn't Chicago or New York, but it isn't always fun and cuddles. And an hour goes by and everybody's getting super nervous. An hour and a half after they broke for lunch, he and his wife come walking in, all smiles, and everybody's like, "Oh my gosh, we were so worried, where were you?" And he looked at them, and I'm not going to try to get his accent quite right, but he said, "Well, it turns out that he and his wife are going door to door in the poorest, most dangerous neighborhoods of Cleveland, telling people about Jesus." And everybody's like, "Well, you could have been killed. What were you thinking?" And he said, "I was thinking that Lutherans have the best gospel in the world. How could I pass up an opportunity to tell more people?" So, even though the people who are loud and out in social media seem to be more concerned about being right than about rightly loving the lost and reaching the people who God loved, and God loves with God's love, there are people out there. The thing is, you don't usually hear about it. I know of a guy who, I do prison ministries, mostly through correspondence. I know of a guy who was a Lutheran who was in jail and had a pair of guys threatening to rape him. And then the next day, and nothing came of it, but it was a really tense situation. And then the next day, one of those guys was up for sentencing. This was in a local jail. He was up for sentencing, and he was facing like 5 to 10 years, or maybe 1 or 2, depending on how the judge ruled. And he was really stressed, and he came up to the same person that he had been joking about raping and said, "Would you pray with me?" And this Christian, this Lutheran, ended up sitting on his bunk in a jail cell and reading through the Psalms out loud with one of his would-be sexual assaulters for an hour, 24 hours, after that crime happened. I know of a Lutheran who, in a small town in Middle America, was willing to, he knew a local clique of like the college homosexual crew and this guy worked as a waiter, and this guy would be, the active homosexual life in this town. There's a lot of drinking. There was a fair amount of being high. There was a lot of staying up too late and being really wasted. Kind of the party scene. And it was not unusual for this guy, if one of them was not safe to drive home, or because of a fight, or kind of that destructive relational stuff that happens so much in the gay lifestyle. They get, they don't have a place to crash. He would, open up his own home and let them, crash on his couch, and this is the kind of thing he did to try and show love to people, who, if they stood up in public, would say that him and all his Christian people need to be outlawed, etc., to try and show love to his enemies. I know of Christians who have become best friends with. I know of Christians who have so cared for their enemies and wanted to do evangelism, that they became best friends of the drunk driver who killed their son. Which, oh my gosh, that sounds terrible until you start thinking about the fact that we killed God's son and he wants us to be his best friend. That is the gospel. And this is the kind of evangelism and the passion that I see, and you don't see it on social media, and you don't see it because it is a quiet thing. It's a one-on-one thing. It is, as much as I shudder at kind of the abuses of the phrase, it's the personal relationships horizontally that reflect the personal. They're only possible because of the personal relationships vertically, to God, because of what God did for us when we deserved hell and death. I could go on all night, but I just wanted to. I'm commanded to encourage one another and lift one another up, and so shout out to you, Lexi. The gospel's out there. It's moving. It's moving among Lutherans. But when the gospel moves best, I think it moves frequently quite quietly and privately, heart to heart and soul to soul. There's a Hebrew phrase that I really like. Modern Hebrew is a nefesh b'nefesh, soul in soul, kind of a hand in hand, but way deeper. And it's still there, and it's still happening, man. So hang in there. All right, peace.